The moment I saw her hand, delicate and trembling with nerves, as she lifted her champagne glass beneath the golden chandeliers, I knew everything was over. The diamond on her finger caught the light like a weapon, flashing across the room, slicing through the illusion I had so carefully built around my heart. It wasn't just any diamond. It was his. Cold. Perfect. Merciless. The kind of diamond that said 1,000 things at once. Power. Permanence. Possession. And as the crowd erupted into applause, their laughter and cheers rising like cruel music, I felt the air drain out of my lungs, as if the walls themselves had closed in and conspired to suffocate me. Damiano Vitale, my secret, my sin, my undoing, stood beside her, his arm loosely around her waist, his smile polite, controlled, almost mechanical. Yet his eyes, those deep, impossibly dark eyes that had once devoured me with such intensity I thought I'd never breathe again, were not smiling. They were scanning the room, restless, searching. And when they found me, hidden at the back of the grand ballroom, half shielded by marble columns and shadows, I felt that familiar pulse inside me, that silent language we had spoken in stolen nights and whispered confessions. But tonight, his gaze didn't hold desire. It held warning. It held fury. I shouldn't have come. I told myself that as I gripped the stem of my glass so tightly my knuckles turned white. I shouldn't have been anywhere near the Vitale estate. Not after what had happened between us. Not after the last words we exchanged. Words that had tasted like love and lies all at once. But curiosity is a cruel mistress. And pain, when it festers long enough, turns into something that almost resembles courage. I needed to see it for myself. To see her, the woman he was going to marry, the one who could stand at his side in daylight while I had been confined to darkness. The orchestra swelled as Damiano raised his glass, his voice deep and smooth, carrying over the crowd. To family, he said, his accent curling around the word like silk and smoke. To loyalty, to Alessia. Her name stung like acid in my throat. People cheered again, toasting their glasses, shouting blessings and congratulations, their laughter mingling with the hum of violins and the faint scent of expensive perfume. The Riccis, the Vitales, the whole kingdom of crime and wealth and blood that ruled this city from behind its velvet curtains, all of them gathered to celebrate this alliance that would tie two empires together in matrimony. A perfect picture of civility and control. And somewhere in the back of that glittering cage stood me. The woman he'd kept in secret. The one who'd known him not as a name whispered in fear, but as the man whose hands had trembled against my skin in the dark, whose heartbeat I had memorized like prayer, whose lies I had believed because his eyes told me not to ask for truth. My chest tightened as he kissed her hand. His lips brushing her knuckles with practiced affection. Everyone clapped, but I saw the flicker in his expression, the tension in his jaw, the ghost of something unspoken behind his calm facade. He looked like a man trapped in his own kingdom, a king bound by the crown he forged with blood. And I, his ghost, his secret, his mistake, stood there, invisible. A waiter passed by, offering another drink, but I shook my head. My pulse was wild. My throat burned. I needed air. I slipped away from the ballroom, heels clicking against the marble, the sounds of celebration fading behind me until all I could hear was my own breath, and the faint echo of my name in his voice, the way he used to say it when no one was listening. Isabella, he would whisper, as though the name itself was something sacred. You don't belong in the light. You belong here, with me. And like a fool, I had believed him. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, the gardens glowing faintly under the moonlight. Roses bloomed along the stone paths, their fragrance sweet and mocking. I leaned against a pillar, staring out at the fountains that glittered like pools of shattered stars. The laughter from inside drifted through the open doors, soft and distant now, a melody from another life. That was where I should have stayed, with the quiet, the shadows, the truth that no longer fit inside the fairy tale they were spinning inside that hall. But then I heard it, his voice, closer now, low and dangerous and intimate even when he wasn't trying. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. I froze. I turned slowly, and there he was, framed by the doorway, his tuxedo crisp, his tie undone just enough to hint at the chaos beneath his surface. His gaze raked over me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, full of everything we hadn't said, everything we'd tried to bury. "You didn't think I'd want to see it for myself?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here, Bella Mia." "Neither should you," I shot back. "Not with her, not when— enough." His tone was sharp, final, the kind of tone that made grown men flinch. But I wasn't a soldier in his army anymore, and I wasn't afraid. I took a step closer. "You think you can hide behind loyalty and business and pretend this doesn't exist?" My hand pressed against my chest. "Pretend we didn't exist?" For a fraction of a second, something in his eyes softened, and I thought I saw the man I had loved, the one who would trace constellations on my skin and whisper that he'd burn the world before he'd lose me. But then it was gone, buried beneath layers of control and power. "This is how it has to be," he said quietly. I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "For who? For your empire? For her?" "For you," he said. The words hit harder than I expected. For me. Always for me. That had been his excuse for everything. For lying, for hiding me, for breaking me. He had always claimed it was to protect me from the world he ruled. But maybe it was just easier for him to keep me caged, to love me without ever risking the consequences. I looked at him one last time, memorizing the sharp line of his jaw, the way the moonlight kissed the scar near his temple, the shadows under his eyes that no amount of power could hide. I realized then that he wasn't my salvation. He was my addiction, my beautiful, deadly addiction, and addictions destroy you in the end. So I smiled, a small, sad thing, and whispered, "Then protect me by letting me go." His expression cracked, just for a heartbeat. Then he turned, walked back toward the light of the ballroom, back toward his fiancée, his empire, his lie. I stood there until I couldn't feel my fingers, until the sound of his name being toasted again drifted into the night, and I knew this was the end of everything I had ever let myself want. But as I turned to leave, the wind shifted, carrying his scent, that faint trace of smoke and cedar and sin, and with it came a quiet certainty that chilled me to my core. He would come for me. And when he did, there would be no running far enough, no hiding deep enough to keep me safe from the man who never let anything, or anyone, walk away from him. I don't remember walking back to my apartment that night. Only the echo of my own footsteps, and the way my heels clicked against the cobblestones like a metronome counting down to the moment my heart would finally give out. The city around me shimmered in gold and black, streetlights stretching across wet pavement, reflections rippling like broken promises. And somewhere in the distance a violin cried through an open window, its music too mournful, too knowing, as if it understood exactly what it meant to love a man like Damiano Vitale, and to survive it only by pretending you never had. When I closed the door behind me, the silence pressed against my skin so thickly it felt alive. My apartment was small, too small for the kind of emotions I carried that night. But it was mine. A sanctuary of anonymity. A place where his scent didn't linger on the sheets, and his voice didn't echo through the walls. Still, as I stood in the middle of that dimly lit room, I could almost hear him in the shadows, That low, unyielding voice telling me to breathe, to listen, to obey, to love him even when it hurt. The gown I wore still smelled faintly of his cologne, cedar and smoke, sin and danger. So I tore it off as though it were a second skin I couldn't bear to inhabit anymore. The fabric pooled around my feet, black and shimmering, a ghost of the night I should never have witnessed. I walked barefoot to the dresser, each step feeling heavier than the last, and pulled out an old duffel bag I hadn't touched in months. The zipper's rasp sounded final, metallic, almost cruel, like the punctuation at the end of a love story that never had a chance to be written properly. I didn't think. I moved by instinct, the same way a wounded animal does when it knows the forest is on fire. I stuffed the bag with whatever clothes my shaking hands found first, tossing in a few photographs, my passport, the emergency cash I had hidden inside the lining of my coat. The one thing I had learned from him was to always be prepared to run. As I packed, flashes of our time together came at me like lightning strikes, his fingers tracing the curve of my spine, his laughter low and rare, his hand resting at the small of my back as if claiming territory. I remembered the first time I saw him lose control, the first time I saw blood on his hands and realized that love, in his world, was not a sanctuary, but a battlefield. And still, I had stayed. God help me, I had stayed. It's strange how love can make you fearless and pathetic all at once, how it can turn reason into rubble and leave you standing among the ruins, calling it devotion. When I found the small silver locket he had given me months ago, a delicate thing, engraved with the letter D on one side and I on the other, I hesitated. My fingers trembled around it, the way they used to tremble when he brushed his lips against my neck, whispering in Italian words I barely understood but felt all the same. I almost put it in the bag. Almost. But then I realized that carrying it with me would be like leaving the door open for him to find me. And if he found me, I knew I would never have the strength to walk away again. So I dropped it into the trash bin and watched it disappear beneath the crumpled papers of an ordinary life. I sat on the edge of my bed, pulled a pen from the nightstand, and stared at a blank sheet of paper for a long time. What does one write to the man who has already taken everything? The man who can ruin a life with a single command, yet whose touch once felt like the only truth left in a world full of lies. I wanted to tell him that I hated him, that I loved him, that I would never forgive him, that I already had. But in the end, all I wrote were 10 words. You chose your kingdom over me. Don't come looking. The ink smudged as the first tear hit the page. I folded the note, placed it on the nightstand beside the glass of whiskey he had left the last time he was here, untouched, amber still glinting like memory. Then I turned off the lights, because I couldn't stand to see the shadows of us dancing on the walls. The night stretched long and restless, filled with the ghosts of every moment we had stolen from time. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the city breathe, to the muffled sounds of cars passing by, to the distant hum of life that would go on without me, without him. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that he would never let this be the end, that men like Damiano didn't lose what they believed they owned. But I silenced that voice, the same way I had silenced every instinct that had tried to save me before. When the first light of dawn bled through the blinds, soft and gray and indifferent, I stood, grabbed the duffel bag, and slipped out the door. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to cut through the fog of heartbreak. I walked fast, head down, blending into the waking city like a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. I didn't look back until I reached the train station. And even then, it wasn't regret that made me turn. It was the eerie, almost certain feeling of being watched. At first, I thought it was paranoia, the aftermath of too many sleepless nights, too many whispered threats disguised as love. But then I caught a glimpse of a man in a dark coat standing by the far platform, his posture too rigid, his attention too still. He wasn't reading a paper. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was waiting for me. Panic rose in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe, to move, to pretend I hadn't seen him. I bought a ticket to a small coastal town 2 hours south, a place no one in Damiano's world would ever think to look. As the train pulled away from the city, the skyline shrinking into a blur of glass and smoke, I pressed my forehead against the window and told myself that I was free. But freedom, I was learning, doesn't come without a cost. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks should have soothed me. But every sound felt amplified. The hiss of the brakes, the murmur of strangers, the faint buzz of my phone vibrating inside my coat pocket. When I finally looked at the screen, the world tilted. One message. No name. Just 2 words. You think you can walk away from me? My fingers went numb. The phone slipped from my grasp, landing on the seat beside me. The landscape outside blurred into streaks of gray and green as the train gained speed, carrying me farther from the city, farther from him, or so I thought. But I knew better. I had always known better. Because when a man like Damiano Vitale decides you belong to him, distance is only an illusion, and escape is nothing but the space between one heartbeat and the next. And somewhere behind me, beyond the noise of the tracks and the wind, I could almost hear it. The low, deliberate rhythm of footsteps that would, sooner or later, find their way back to me. It's strange, the way silence can turn into a sound all its own when you're running from someone who knows how to move through shadows, how to find you even when you've buried yourself beneath false names and untraceable addresses, as though the air itself betrays your breath, as though every heartbeat sends out a signal that says he's coming. I had thought the little coastal town would be my salvation. It was quiet, sun-drenched, almost forgotten. A place where the ocean whispered secrets to the shore, and the streets smelled of salt and citrus and solitude. I rented a small apartment above a bakery whose owner didn't ask questions, and for a while I pretended I was just another traveler passing through, someone who read books by the window and took long walks by the sea, and didn't flinch every time a car slowed too long near the curb. I told myself that I had left Damiano Vitale behind, in the city of smoke and chandeliers and blood-soaked promises, that the message on my phone had been nothing but a last flare of control, a warning meant to remind me who I belonged to, but that it wasn't real. Not anymore. Not here. But lies have a way of making themselves comfortable when they know they're needed. At first, it was small things, a feeling more than a fact. The sound of footsteps behind me when I walked home after sunset, steady but unhurried, fading the moment I turned. The same black car parked across from the bakery every morning, always empty, always there. A delivery of roses with no note, their petals the exact shade of red as the dress I wore the night he first told me he loved me. I threw them out, but the scent lingered for days. One evening, when the sky was melting into lavender and gold, and the sea looked like it could swallow the sun whole, I saw a man standing by the pier, smoking. He didn't look at me, not directly, but there was something about the way he exhaled. Slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, that made my pulse trip over itself. I changed direction, heart pounding, pretending to browse through a souvenir stand, pretending not to feel the weight of eyes I couldn't see but could feel tracing every move I made. When I turned back, he was gone. Only the faint curl of smoke remained, drifting in the wind like a promise. That night I dreamed of him. Not the man by the pier, but him, Damiano. I dreamed of the way he would whisper my name against my skin, as though the act of saying it was enough to mark it, to own it, to make sure the world knew it had already been claimed. I woke up tangled in my sheets, my throat tight, my body betraying me in ways I refused to acknowledge, because even in absence, he still found a way to possess me. Days blurred into weeks. and the small, peaceful life I had tried to build began to feel like a performance staged for an invisible audience. I started leaving the lights on when I slept. I double-locked the doors. I stopped answering my phone. Every sound became suspicious, every face unfamiliar, every silence too heavy. The fear wasn't constant. It came in waves, like the tide. But when it came, it was suffocating. Then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, slipped under my door one morning while I was still asleep. I found it lying on the floor, folded neatly, my name scrawled across it in handwriting I knew too well. Sharp, elegant, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who never had to rush for anything. Isabella, it began, do you really think distance makes you safe? You can change your name, your hair, your city, but you can't change the rhythm of your breath. I know it. I've counted it. You can't hide that from me. Come home before I come for you. The paper smelled faintly of him. I dropped it like it had burned me, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even stand for a moment. There was no return address because he didn't need one. He was everywhere. I spent the rest of that day in motion, packing again, erasing traces, deleting photos, wiping my phone, buying a bus ticket this time instead of a train. I had no plan, no destination, only the primal instinct to move, to vanish, to stay one breath ahead of him. But when I stepped out onto the narrow street, suitcase in hand, I saw it, parked at the corner, sleek and black, its windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors reflecting my fear back at me. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true. I turned down another street, faster this time, the wheels of my suitcase clattering against the cobblestones, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I knew I'd see something I wasn't ready to face. At the bus station, the air smelled of diesel and rain, the kind of scent that clung to everything and everyone. I bought the first ticket I could find. Destination didn't matter, only distance. As I sat waiting, I glanced up at the row of glass windows that overlooked the street, and for the briefest moment, I saw him. Or maybe it was just the reflection of who I was when I belonged to him. Tall, immaculate, expression unreadable, standing at the edge of the crowd, his hands in his pockets, as if he had all the time in the world. And though logic screamed it couldn't be him, he had a fiancé, a business, an empire to run. My body reacted before my mind did. My breath caught, my skin prickled, and I felt that familiar electricity crawl up my spine, the one that whispered, "You're not free." I blinked, and he was gone. The bus arrived. I boarded it, took a seat by the window, and watched the world slide by in blurs of motion and memory. But as the landscape shifted, something inside me refused to believe I had escaped. Damiano Vitale didn't chase women. He hunted them. And when he decided something, or someone, was his, he never stopped until he had it back under his control. That night, in another town, another rented room that smelled faintly of mildew and fear. I opened my phone again even though I had promised myself not to. There were no new messages. Not yet. But the silence was worse than the threat. It was patient. It was deliberate. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way his hands would trace my pulse when I slept, how he once said, "If you ever try to leave, I'll find you." Not because I have to, but because I want to. At the time, I thought it was love dressed up in darkness. Now I understood. It was possession dressed up as passion. The irony is that part of me still wanted him to find me. Because as much as I feared him, as much as I hated what he had done to me, I also missed the way he looked at me like I was the only thing in a world full of power and chaos that made him feel alive. That kind of hunger is hard to forget, and harder to live without. I drifted into uneasy sleep sometime before dawn, but the dream came again, this time sharper, more vivid. I was running through the woods, barefoot, the ground cold and damp, branches clawing at my skin. Behind me, his voice called my name, not shouting, not angry, but calm, almost tender. "You can run, Bella, but I'm already there." When I woke, my heart was hammering, and the first light of morning spilled through the curtains like accusation. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and then froze. On the nightstand beside me lay a single black rose. Its petals were perfect, its stem cut clean. And tucked beneath it, a note written in the same elegant script as before. "You should know better than to make me chase you." My breath stuttered, my pulse stopped for half a beat, and in that suspended silence between fear and inevitability, I understood that the hunt was over. He had found me. There is a certain stillness that comes before destruction, a kind of breathless calm that fools you into believing that maybe, just maybe, you still have control over your life, that the world hasn't yet shifted beneath your feet, that fate isn't already reaching out its hand to drag you back into the arms of the man you swore you would never see again. That was the stillness that filled the room when I found the black rose. I remember staring at it for what felt like hours, the petals so dark they almost shimmered blue under the weak morning light, its stem cut at a perfect angle like something ritualistic, deliberate, personal. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a message, a signature, a declaration. Damiano Vitale didn't need to knock or threaten or announce his arrival. He simply existed in the spaces you thought were yours and reminded you that nothing, not even your freedom, belonged to you without his permission. I sat there on the edge of the bed, my heart beating unevenly, my breath shallow and broken, trying to make sense of what I already knew deep down. He was here. Not metaphorically, not through shadows or messages or ghosts, but here in this town, breathing the same air, watching the same sunrise, maybe standing in the street below at that very moment. I should have run, I should have screamed, I should have done something. But instead I felt this strange and terrible calm settle over me, as though my body had decided to surrender before my mind had even caught up. Maybe because I knew there was no point in fighting a man like Damiano. He was not the kind of storm you escaped. He was the kind that swallowed you whole and made you believe it was love. I stood, every motion careful, deliberate, as though sudden movement might summon him from the shadows. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my bare feet, the air thick with that intoxicating scent of smoke and cedar that always preceded him like a haunting. I glanced toward the window and froze. He was there. Across the narrow street, leaning against the hood of a black car that looked too expensive for this forgotten coastal town, he stood as if he had been carved from the same darkness that had chased me across cities and dreams. He wasn't looking up. Not yet. His head was bowed slightly, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cigarette that burned low between his fingers, the smoke rising in thin, curling threads. And though there was distance between us, I could feel him the way you feel the sun through glass. Dangerous, consuming, inescapable. Then slowly he looked up. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that instant the world tilted, time fractured, and every promise I had made to myself, to stay gone, to stay strong, to stay free, crumbled beneath the weight of that gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just watched me, and somehow that was worse than anything else, because in his silence I heard everything. The anger, the longing, the hunger, the inevitability. I stepped back from the window, my pulse thundering, my body trembling with an emotion I couldn't name, part fear, part relief, part something so much darker. I turned, grabbed my bag, and started toward the door. But it was already too late. The lock clicked before I even reached it. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. And then the door opened, slow and deliberate, as though whoever stood on the other side had no reason to rush. He stepped inside without asking, without hesitation, without guilt. Damiano Vitale filled the room the way storms fill the sky, completely, inevitably, mercilessly. He wore black, as he always did, the fabric of his suit so sharp and tailored it made the air seem less refined by comparison. His tie was gone, the top buttons of his shirt undone, exposing a sliver of the skin I once kissed in the dark. He didn't look tired, though I knew he hadn't slept in days. He looked driven, possessed by something that existed beyond reason or restraint. "Hello, Bella," he said, his voice low, rough, intimate in a way that made my stomach twist. "Did you miss me?" I wanted to lie, to spit venom, to remind him that he had no right to ask me that. But my voice betrayed me. "You shouldn't be here." He laughed softly, stepping closer, the sound of it rich and dark, filling the space between us. "You said that last time," he murmured. "And yet here we are again." I backed away until my shoulders brushed the wall, but he didn't stop moving. Each step he took felt measured, almost predatory, his gaze never leaving mine. "You shouldn't have run," he said. "You know I hate chasing things I already own." "I'm not yours," I whispered, but it sounded weak, even to my own ears. He reached out then, his fingers grazing my jaw, tilting my chin upward until I had no choice but to meet his eyes. "You've been mine since the first night you said my name like a secret you didn't want anyone else to hear." His thumb brushed my lower lip, slow, deliberate, claiming, "And you'll be mine until the last breath leaves your body." The room felt smaller with every heartbeat. The air, thinner. I wanted to shove him away, to scream, to remind him that I had left, that I had chosen to leave, but part of me, that reckless, broken part that still remembered what it felt like to be loved by him, stayed frozen. "You're engaged," I managed to say, the words sharp, desperate. "You have a fiancé." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or regret, or both. "That was business," he said. "This is personal." He said it like a confession, like an apology he didn't know how to give. When he stepped closer again, I turned my head, but his hand caught my wrist, gentle yet unyielding. "Don't run from me," he said, his breath hot against my ear. "You know I'll always find you." "I don't want to be found," I whispered. "Then why did you look at me like that just now?" His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "Why did you tremble when you saw me?" Because part of me still loved him. Because part of me always would. But I couldn't say that. Not without shattering the fragile lie I'd been trying to live. He must have seen the answer in my silence because his expression softened for the briefest moment, a crack in the armor of the man the world feared. "You think I don't know what I've done to you?" he murmured. "You think I don't hate myself for it? Then let me go," I said, my voice breaking on the words. "Please." He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and for a moment I thought he might actually do it. But when he opened them again, the softness was gone. "No," he said simply. "Not this time." He reached into his pocket, pulled out my locket, the same one I had thrown away, and placed it in my palm. "You can keep running if you want," he said, "but you'll always find me waiting at the end." I stared at the locket, at the familiar engraving, at the way it felt heavy and cold against my skin. He had found it. He had found everything. When I looked up, he was already at the door. "You have until sunset to pack," he said. "You're coming home with me." And then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of smoke and inevitability. I sank to the floor, clutching the locket so tightly it bit into my palm, and for the first time since I'd left him, I didn't know if I was afraid of him, or of myself, for wanting him to come back. Outside, the sea roared against the cliffs, wild and merciless, as if echoing the truth I didn't want to face. He wasn't chasing me anymore. He had caught me. There are prisons that wear their bars openly, cold, iron, merciless, and then there are prisons like the one I found myself in, now, gilded and perfumed, wrapped in velvet and silence, built not to contain my body but to suffocate my will, to remind me with every passing hour that I was no longer a woman, but a secret hidden inside the home of a man who had the world at his feet, and yet could not bear to let me go. The Vitale estate was not a home. It was a fortress pretending to be one. A cathedral of marble and menace perched above the sea. Its windows always shuttered. Its halls echoing with the ghosts of power. From the outside, it looked serene, a monument to wealth and legacy. But inside, it pulsed with quiet violence, the kind that didn't leave bruises but carved itself into the air like a warning. I could feel it in the way the staff avoided my eyes, in the hushed way they spoke when they thought I wasn't listening, in the unspoken question that lingered on their tongues. Who is she? I was no one, and that was exactly what Damiano wanted. He hadn't spoken much since the night he brought me here, only enough to tell me that I was safe, though his version of safety was a strange, possessive kind of captivity, wrapped in silk sheets and unspoken rules. He had given me a room overlooking the cliffs, a room that smelled faintly of salt and sandalwood and memory, and though the door was never locked, I knew better than to try to leave. Every evening I would hear the sound of his voice through the walls, deep and measured, conducting meetings that blurred the line between business and threat. I would sit by the window, watching the ocean crash against the rocks below, and think about what freedom had felt like before he reminded me that I would never truly know it again. And then, on the third day, she came. Alessia Ricci. I knew her name long before I ever saw her face. She was the daughter of Giovanni Ricci, one of the most feared men in southern Italy, and the fiancé Damiano had been meant to marry, the alliance that would have sealed two empires, two dynasties built on loyalty and blood. But alliances forged in darkness are fragile things, and love, if you could call what Damiano and I had love, had a way of poisoning them. I heard her before I saw her, her heels clicking against the marble like gunfire, her voice smooth and sharp, cutting through the hushed tones of the servants as she demanded to know where he was. There was authority in that voice, entitlement, a confidence that came from never having to doubt her place in the world. When she entered the drawing room where I sat pretending to read, I understood immediately why Damiano had chosen her. For strategy, for power, for optics. She was beautiful in a way that demanded attention. Tall, poised, her dark hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck, her eyes cold and clever, assessing everything before her. She wore red, the color of conquest, and diamonds that glittered like shards of ice. For a long, unbearable moment, she said nothing. She simply looked at me, her gaze sweeping over every inch of me, taking in the loose silk robe, the bare feet, the book trembling slightly in my hands. Then she smiled, slow, deliberate, devastating. "So," she said, her voice low and elegant, "you're the reason." I didn't answer. She crossed the room, uninvited, her perfume filling the air like a warning. "You must be very proud of yourself," she said, stopping just short of where I sat. "Few women have managed to make Damiano Vitale lose his sense of reason, but you've managed to make him forget his obligations, his alliances, his name." She tilted her head, the smile never leaving her lips. "Tell me, was it worth it?" Her words struck like a whip, each one perfectly aimed. I wanted to stand, to meet her stare, to defend myself, but I couldn't. Because in that moment, surrounded by everything that belonged to him, I realized she was right. I had undone something much larger than myself. "I didn't mean for—" I began, but she cut me off with a laugh so soft it felt cruel. "No," she said, "women like you never mean for it to happen. You think love excuses everything. You think passion makes you untouchable. But men like Damiano don't fall in love, dear. They own. And when he tires of owning you, he'll return to the world that actually matters. And you—" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. you'll be nothing more than a memory he has to hide." Her words burned through me, not because they were lies, but because they sounded too much like truth. When she straightened, her eyes glinted with something colder than jealousy. Pity, perhaps, or contempt. "I'm not here to fight over him," she said. "I'm here to warn you. The Ricci family does not tolerate humiliation. You may think he can protect you, but the moment he defies us, he becomes a liability. And liabilities—" She smiled again, that terrifying, perfect smile. "They get erased." She reached out then, her manicured fingers brushing the edge of my hair, and the gesture, so deceptively gentle, made me flinch. "You should leave while you still can," she whispered, "before his world decides you're in the way." When she left, the room felt colder, emptier, heavier. I sat there for a long time, the echoes of her words circling through my mind like vultures. Liabilities get erased. That night, Damiano came to me. He found me by the window again, my arms wrapped around myself, the sea roaring below. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, his reflection merging with mine in the glass, his presence filling the silence until I couldn't bear it anymore. "She was here," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "I know," he replied. "She wanted to see what she was losing." I turned to face him, anger sparking through the fog of fear. "You should have told me she was coming." "I didn't think she'd dare," he said. "Not here." "She threatened me," I whispered. "She said the Riccis won't let this go." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark as the storm gathering outside. "Let them try." "It's not just you they'll come for," I said. "It's me. And you can't protect me from everyone." His hand came up, fingers brushing my cheek, his touch both tender and possessive. "You underestimate what I'm willing to do for you." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not the man who had held me, kissed me, loved me in secret, but the ruler he had become, the man who would burn entire families to keep what was his. And I realized with a clarity that terrified me that Alessia hadn't come here just to threaten me. She had come to remind me that I was standing in the path of a war. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea, distant but growing louder. Damiano's voice was quiet when he finally spoke again. "You're not leaving this house," he said. "Not until I say it's safe." "And if it never is?" I asked. He met my eyes, and in his silence I heard the truth. It never would be. He kissed me then, slow and devastating, as if trying to brand me one last time before the world fell apart. And as his mouth claimed mine, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, beyond the walls of this gilded prison, Alessia Ricci was already setting the fire that would burn everything we knew to the ground. The storm came at night, not from the sky, but from within the walls themselves, as if the house had been holding its breath for too long, and finally exhaled the kind of fury that leaves no survivors, no peace, only the echoes of what it destroys. I felt it before I heard it, the tension thickening in the air, the way the staff whispered nervously down the corridors, the sudden deafening silence that fell whenever Damiano's name was spoken. It was as though the entire world had tilted toward the inevitable, and all that was left was for it to fall. He had disappeared after our argument, the one that ended with my voice cracking under the weight of fear, and his lips silencing my protests, as if love could erase the truth. Hours passed, the rain hammering against the glass, the sea raging below, and I sat by the window again, watching lightning fracture the horizon into brief moments of clarity. I wanted to believe that this was just another of his temper's storms, the kind that burned out as quickly as it came, but something about the air told me that this time, the fire would not be contained. When he returned, just past midnight, I barely recognized him. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt clung to his chest, damp with rain and something darker, something metallic that gleamed faintly in the low light. His hands were red, His jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his teeth grind when he exhaled. And his eyes, those beautiful, terrifying eyes, were filled with the kind of quiet that comes only after violence. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, dripping on the marble, watching me like a man standing at the edge of a confession he could not take back. "What did you do?" I whispered, though part of me already knew. He closed his eyes briefly, ran a blood-stained hand through his hair, and said, in that low voice that always seemed to carry the weight of every decision he had ever made, "I ended it." My breath caught. "What do you mean you ended it?" "I made a choice," he said, stepping closer, the scent of rain and iron trailing behind him. "The Ricci's wanted war. They got one." I stared at him, the words sinking slowly into me like stones into water. "You killed them?" His gaze locked onto mine, and the silence that followed was answer enough. For a moment I couldn't move. The air between us felt alive, sharp, filled with ghosts. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand why he couldn't just walk away, why he couldn't let power go, why he always had to drown everything, even love, in blood. But the words tangled in my throat because I knew, deep down, that this was who he had always been. He reached for me then, his hands rough and trembling, his voice breaking for the first time I had ever heard. "They threatened you, Isabella. They said your name. They knew where you were. I couldn't let them." He stopped, his breath ragged. "I couldn't let them touch you." "You think this protects me?" I said, tears rising unbidden. "You think killing them makes me safe? You've just painted a target on both of us." "I've made a promise," he said, his tone shifting, hardening again. "A blood oath. No one touches what's mine." That word, mine, hit like a slap. Not because of how he said it, but because of how much I wanted to believe in the lie of it. He cupped my face, his thumb brushing away a tear that hadn't yet fallen. "I did this for you," he whispered, almost pleading. "Every drop, every scream, every sin, I'd do it all again if it meant keeping you alive." I wanted to tell him that love shouldn't cost this much, that it shouldn't demand blood as proof of its existence. But the words felt hollow in a house that thrummed with the echoes of his choices. Somewhere below us, I could hear the faint rumble of engines, men moving, orders being carried out. The world was shifting, and I was standing at the center of it, too entangled in him to escape, too afraid to stay. He turned from me then, pouring himself a drink, the liquid trembling in his hand before he swallowed it whole. "They'll come for me now," he said quietly. "For us. Giovanni Ricci won't forgive what I've done." "And what happens to me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What happens when they come?" He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. "You stay here. You do nothing. You trust me." "Trust you?" I laughed, bitter and broken. "You've destroyed an entire family. You've destroyed yourself." He set the glass down hard, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "I destroyed anyone who threatened to take you from me. That's not the same thing." But it was, and we both knew it. Hours later, when the house had gone quiet again, I wandered through the hallways, barefoot, following the lingering scent of smoke and rain. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me as I passed, silent witnesses to centuries of men who mistook violence for loyalty. I stopped at the grand staircase, looking down at the main hall, where Damiano now stood surrounded by his men, giving orders in a voice that brooked no defiance. He looked like a king addressing his court, his authority absolute, his heart nowhere to be found. I realized then that Alessia had been right all along. Love didn't save men like Damiano, it only made them more dangerous. When he saw me, he dismissed the others with a nod, his gaze following me as I descended the stairs. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his tone softening. "I couldn't sleep," I replied. "Too much blood in the air." He sighed, stepped forward, and pulled me against him. His arms were strong, unyielding, the kind of embrace that felt like both shelter and cage. "You don't have to understand what I did," he murmured against my hair. "You just have to survive it." I wanted to resist, to push him away, but I didn't. Instead, I let him hold me, let the rhythm of his heartbeat drown out the storm outside. It was steady, powerful, almost soothing, until I remembered that it was the same heart that had stopped others from beating. Later, when he finally fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, tracing the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight. His hand rested against my waist, heavy, possessive even in sleep. I thought of Alessia's words, of the promise of erasure, of the inevitability of vengeance. The Ricci's wouldn't stay silent. The blood oath he had sworn to me would only tighten its noose around us both. Outside, thunder cracked again, rolling across the horizon like a warning. I rose quietly, moving to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. In the distance, far beyond the cliffs, lights flickered where there should have been darkness. Cars, dozens of them. I pressed a hand to my chest, the panic slow and creeping, like ice beneath my skin. They were coming. I turned back to the bed, to the man who had burned his world to protect me, and for the first time since I met him, I wasn't sure if I should wake him or run before the fire reached us both. The night we fled the Vitale estate, the world felt as if it had been stripped of sound, as though even the ocean had chosen silence out of respect for the blood that had been spilled to buy our escape. I remember the way the headlights sliced through the fog, the rhythmic hum of the tires against the wet road, and the faint tremor in Damiano's hands as he gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles pale beneath the strain, the scent of gunpowder still clinging to his jacket like a shadow that refused to let go. I sat beside him, my body trembling not from the cold, but from the raw, nauseating knowledge that everything I had once been, every belief, every boundary, every dream, had been erased the moment I chose to love a man whose heart beat in time with chaos. The rain came in sheets, relentless, turning the roads into rivers and the world into a blur of gray and silver. Neither of us spoke, though I could feel the words hovering between us like ghosts, heavy and unfinished. The silence was not peace, it was punishment, a fragile bridge between guilt and desire that neither of us dared to cross. Every now and then, he would glance at me, his eyes dark, searching, as if trying to confirm that I was still there, that I hadn't disappeared into the storm the way everything else in his life seemed to do. We drove for hours, through forests that whispered secrets, through villages that slept behind shuttered windows, through the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow time itself, until the car finally slowed near dawn, the first light creeping timidly across the horizon. The safe house was hidden deep in the hills, a stone villa surrounded by vineyards and silence, its beauty almost cruel in contrast to the world we had left behind. When he killed the engine, the sudden stillness felt deafening. For a moment, he just sat there, staring out at nothing, his breath visible in the cold air. Then he turned to me, his voice hoarse, low, and almost human. "We'll be safe here," he said. The words sounded hollow, and we both knew it. Inside, the villa smelled of dust and cedar, a place abandoned but not forgotten. The furniture was old, heavy, covered with white sheets like corpses awaiting resurrection. Damiano moved through the space with the ease of someone who had been here before, lighting a fire, checking the windows, speaking occasionally to the few men who had followed us. Loyal soldiers with faces carved from stone and eyes that never lingered too long on me. When they left, taking their silence with them, we were alone again. For the first time in days, I could breathe, though the air felt thick with everything unsaid. I wandered into the kitchen, lit only by the flicker of the fire spilling in from the main room, and poured myself a glass of water that tasted faintly of metal. My reflection in the window startled me. Eyes hollow, hair tangled, a smear of ash along my temple. I looked like someone who had been loved by war. He came up behind me then, his presence heavy but quiet, his hands finding my shoulders with the same careful possessiveness that had once made me feel protected and now only made me feel trapped. "You should rest," he murmured. "I can't," I said, my voice breaking on the edge of exhaustion. He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he might step back, give me space, but instead he turned me to face him, his eyes searching mine as if he could find forgiveness somewhere in the ruins. "You're angry," he said. "I'm terrified," I whispered. "There's a difference." He nodded once, slowly, his thumb brushing along my jaw in that tender way that always betrayed him, that always made me remember that beneath all the power and brutality, there was still the man who had once whispered poetry in Italian against my skin, as if he'd been praying. "I did what I had to," he said, more to himself than to me. "And how many more will you have to kill before you're done protecting me?" I asked. The question hung between us like smoke. He stepped away, pacing near the fire, his silhouette sharp against the flames. "You think I wanted this?" he said, his tone rising, cracking under the weight of something I couldn't name. "You think I wanted to trade peace for blood? I tried to fix it, Isabella. I tried to make them understand. The engagement, Alessia, it was supposed to keep you safe." I froze, the words slicing through the air like glass. "You did it for me?" He looked at me then. Really looked, and I saw the truth there. The guilt, the desperation, the twisted kind of love that drove him to destroy everything in the name of salvation. "Giovanni Ricci found out about us months ago," he said quietly. "He threatened to expose you, to use you against me. The engagement was my way of keeping him close, keeping his eyes off you. It was the only way I could control him without spilling blood." "But you did spill blood," I said, my voice trembling. "You spilled all of it." He didn't deny it. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, his eyes burning with that terrible honesty I had once mistaken for devotion. "I thought I could control it," he said. "I thought I could make it clean. But men like me, we don't get clean endings. We only get survival." I wanted to hate him for it, for believing that violence could ever be love. But as I looked at him standing there, broken and burning in equal measure, I realized that he was right about one thing. There was no going back. Not for him. Not for me. Not for us. The silence stretched again, long and aching. The fire cracked softly, the only witness to the collapse of everything I had once understood about the man I loved. Finally, he moved closer, his voice low and unsteady. "You can still leave," he said. "If you walk out that door now, I won't stop you. I'll make sure they never find you. You can have your life back." The words should have felt like salvation, but instead they broke me. Because I knew they weren't true. Because I knew even if I left, he would always find me in the quiet moments, between breaths, between heartbeats, between dreams. I stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking to nothing. "And what about you?" I asked softly. "What happens to you if I go?" His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then I burn alone?" There it was again. The inevitability. The darkness that drew me even as it destroyed me. I reached up, my fingers brushing against the line of his jaw, feeling the tremor there. The pulse that beat too hard, too fast. "You don't get to decide who burns," I said. "Not anymore." He caught my wrist, pulled me closer, his breath warm against my skin. "Then stay," he whispered. "Stay and let it be both of us." The firelight flickered across his face, painting him in shades of gold and ruin. I knew that staying meant surrendering to a world I couldn't survive, but leaving felt like tearing out a part of myself I no longer knew how to live without. so I didn't answer. I just kissed him. The kind of kiss that tasted like confession and grief, like forgiveness wrapped in damnation. And when he kissed me back, I understood that this was what it meant to love a man like Damiano Vitale, to drown willingly, to mistake the fall for flight. Outside, the storm finally began to fade, the dawn pressing pale light against the horizon. But even as the world began to wake, I knew that what had happened could never be undone. The Riccis would come. Blood would call to blood. And when it did, there would be no safe house, no hiding, no absolution left for either of us. Because the truth had finally come between us. And the truth was this: he had killed for me. And I was starting to understand that part of me wanted him to. There are moments when silence becomes a living thing, when it presses so tightly against your skin that even breathing feels like a betrayal of it. And in those moments you begin to understand that peace is not the absence of war, but the fragile pause between its echoes. That was how the days passed in the safe house. Slow, suspended, trembling with an invisible tension that neither of us dared to name, as though the walls themselves were listening for the sound of a truth we both refused to speak. For a time, it was almost possible to pretend that the rest of the world no longer existed. The villa, isolated among endless rows of dark vines and sleeping hills, felt like the last place on earth where time dared to move. The mornings came softly, sunlight pouring in through the dust-covered windows like forgiveness we hadn't earned, and Damiano would sit across from me at the kitchen table, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie forgotten, his expression unreadable as he read the same newspaper over and over, pretending not to notice that the news he was searching for, the retaliation, the blood price, had not yet come. But I saw the cracks forming long before he did, in the way his men grew restless, their whispers trailing like smoke through the hallways, their loyalty shifting with the wind. Men who kill for a living do not understand stillness. It breeds doubt, and doubt breeds danger. I watched it unfold quietly, like rot spreading beneath, polished wood, slow and invisible until it was too late. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with bruised light, I found Damiano standing outside by the vineyard, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze lost in the horizon. The air smelled of smoke and wet earth, and the wind tugged gently at his shirt, as though even it wanted to pull him away from whatever thoughts haunted him. "They're losing patience," I said softly, stepping closer. He didn't turn to look at me. "Let them." "They're afraid," I said. He took a slow sip, his jaw tightening. "Fear keeps them loyal." "No," I whispered. "Fear makes them dangerous." For a long moment he said nothing, and then finally he turned, his eyes catching mine with that same quiet intensity that had once made me forget who I was. "You think you understand them," he said, "but you don't. Loyalty bought with fear is still loyalty." I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that what he mistook for obedience was just silence waiting for a crack, but I didn't. Because deep down, I knew that the only thing more dangerous than defying a man like Damiano Vitale was proving him wrong. That night, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs, low, urgent, angry. I slipped from the bed, careful not to wake him, and crept to the edge of the staircase, where the flicker of candlelight danced against the walls. 3 of his men stood in the foyer, their faces tense, their words hushed but sharp enough to cut through the dark. "Can't stay here forever," one of them said. "The Riccis will find us. They always do." "They don't even need to find us," another muttered. "They already know. You think that attack in Naples was random? They knew where we were going before we did." A third voice, lower, quieter, almost calm. Then someone told them. The silence that followed was thick, poisonous. I froze. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Someone told them. The words echoed through me, heavy and cold. I backed away, one step at a time, until the floor creaked under my heel. The sound was small, but it was enough. 3 pairs of eyes snapped upward, their faces twisting in surprise before suspicion took over. I didn't wait to see who would speak first. I turned and ran, heart pounding, back through the hall. But before I could reach the bedroom, a hand caught my arm, strong and unyielding, spinning me around. "Isabella," Damiano said, his voice low but steady, his eyes sharp. "What happened?" I tried to speak, but my voice shook. "They're talking downstairs. They think there's a traitor. They think someone told the Ricci's where we are." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then he brushed past me, his face carved from stone, his rage quiet and cold. When he reached the landing, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. "What are you whispering about?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm. The men stiffened, their eyes darting between each other. The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, one of them spoke, the youngest, a man named Matteo, his voice trembling. "Someone's been talking, boss?" The Ricci's knew where to find the shipments, the safe routes, the villa. Damiano descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, each movement measured. "And you think it was one of you?" Matteo swallowed hard. "We don't know, sir, but you think it wasn't me?" Damiano finished for him, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, sir," Matteo said quickly, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking just once toward the door, toward the car waiting outside. It was enough. Damiano moved faster than I could see, his hand catching Matteo by the throat, slamming him against the wall. The sound was brutal, final. "You think you can sell me out to the Ricci's and walk away breathing?" "Boss, I didn't—" The gunshot cut him off, sharp and merciless, echoing through the house like thunder. The smell of gunpowder burned the air, and for a moment there was nothing but silence, heavy and ringing, as the other men stared at the body crumpled at their feet. Damiano didn't even look down. "Betrayal," he said, his voice calm again, "has a price." I stood frozen on the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching as the blood spread slowly across the marble, dark and shining. I wanted to scream, to run, to shake him and make him see what he had become. But he turned then, his eyes finding mine, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not pride, not satisfaction, regret. He said nothing, just walked past me, his hand brushing mine as he went, his touch colder than the night outside. Later, when the body was gone and the men dismissed, he sat alone by the fire, staring into it as though he could burn away the part of himself that had pulled the trigger. I approached quietly, the air between us heavy with the things we could never take back. "You didn't have to kill him," I said softly. "He would have sold us," he replied without looking at me. "You don't know that." His eyes lifted to mine, dark and hollow. "In my world, knowing isn't required. Believing is enough." The words broke something inside me, because I realized that somewhere along the line, belief had replaced truth, and love had become the currency we used to excuse everything. He reached for me then, his hand trembling slightly. "You still don't understand, do you?" he whispered. "Every time I kill, I lose a piece of myself. But when it's for you, I don't care what's left." And though I wanted to pull away, though I wanted to tell him that this wasn't love, that it was madness wearing its mask, I couldn't. Because his voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, he wasn't the Mafia king who ruled through fear. He was just a man begging to be seen. Outside, the night was alive again, the wind howling through the vines, the dogs barking in the distance, the faint hum of engines somewhere far off. The world was moving closer. I looked at him, my voice breaking as I spoke. "They'll come for us. You know they will." He nodded once, slow and certain. "Let them. This time I'm ready." But as he turned back to the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that readiness was just another word for doom. And when I glanced toward the window, I saw it, just a flicker of movement at the tree line, a glint of headlights too far to be coincidence. We weren't alone anymore. The betrayal hadn't ended with Matteo. It had only just begun. There are nights that never end, nights that stretch so long and deep that they become a kind of living nightmare, and you start to wonder if dawn will ever come, or if the world has decided to keep you suspended forever between fear and fate. The night they came for us was one of those nights, the kind where the air itself felt alive, trembling with the promise of violence, the sky heavy with rain that refused to fall, and every heartbeat sounded like a countdown to the inevitable. I remember waking to the sound of footsteps outside, quick and uneven, the kind that belong to men who carry guns and purpose. The house was dark, the fire long since gone cold, but the smell of smoke still clung to the air, thick and bitter, as though it had learned to stay. For a moment I thought it was another dream, the kind that starts with silence and ends in blood. But then I saw Damiano at the window, his body tense, his hand hovering near the gun on the table, and I knew it was real. "They've found us," he said quietly without turning, his voice stripped of everything except certainty. Those words hit harder than the sound of any gunshot could. I froze. The blanket clutched around me, my mind still half asleep but my heart fully awake, thundering so loudly I thought it might give us away. "How?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Betrayal had a way of multiplying once it began, like fire catching in dry grass. He didn't answer, only glanced at me once, his eyes dark and calm in that terrifying way that meant the storm inside him had already broken free. "Get dressed," he said. "Now." The next few minutes blurred together, hands shaking as I pulled on my clothes, the metallic click of a gun being loaded, the scent of gasoline and damp earth seeping through the cracks in the walls. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder, headlights cutting across the vineyard like searchlights hunting ghosts. I caught a glimpse of shadows moving through the rows of vines, men with weapons, moving in formation, quiet and sure. They weren't coming to talk. They were coming to end it. Damiano turned to me, his hand gripping my chin just long enough to make me meet his eyes. "If I tell you to run, you run," he said. "Don't argue. Don't look. Back. Do you understand?" "I won't leave you," I said, but my voice shook with the lie. He smiled then, a small, broken thing that looked more like sorrow than reassurance. "You already did once," he said softly, "and I came for you. I always will." Before I could answer, the first shot shattered the night. The sound was deafening, echoing through the valley, followed by the sharp crack of glass as a bullet tore through the window. Damiano grabbed me, dragging me to the floor as another shot hit the wall above us, spraying dust and splinters into the air. The smell of gunpowder burned my throat, and for a second, all I could do was listen. The chaos outside, the shouts in Italian, the rapid fire of weapons splitting the quiet open like a wound. He moved with terrifying precision, his body all instinct and control. "Stay here," he said, already reaching for the door. "No," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Damiano." But he was gone before I could finish, disappearing into the hall with the sound of war rising around him. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath shallow, every sense alive with terror. The house trembled with gunfire, with footsteps, with the weight of violence that seemed to come from every direction at once. I could hear him shouting orders, his voice steady even in the chaos, the kind of voice men would follow into death without question. Then came the sound of shattering glass, the crash of a door giving way, and suddenly the gunfire was inside the villa. I crawled toward the corner, my fingers digging into the floor, the air thick with dust and fear. Somewhere nearby, one of Damiano's men screamed, a sound that cut off too suddenly, and then there was silence again. The kind that comes only when death has entered a room, I don't know how long I stayed there, crouched in the dark, trembling, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. Minutes, maybe hours. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not running, not searching, but certain. I looked up just as the door creaked open, and there he was. Not Damiano. The man who stood in the doorway wore the same dark clothes as the others, but his face was unfamiliar. Young, scarred, his eyes cold and empty. He raised the gun slowly, almost lazily, as if this moment meant nothing to him. I didn't think. I lunged for the nearest thing I could reach, a piece of broken wood from the shattered chair, and swung. It hit his arm, hard enough to make him stumble, the gun firing once, the bullet grazing my shoulder before embedding in the wall. Pain shot through me, white and sharp, but adrenaline drowned it out. I pushed past him, running into the hall, barefoot, the floor slick with something warm that I didn't want to name. "Isabella!" His voice. Damiano's. I turned toward it, heart leaping, and there he was at the end of the corridor, blood on his face, a gun in his hand, his expression unreadable but alive. He reached for me, shouting something I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears, and then another shot rang out from behind him. He staggered. The world slowed, the sound fading into a hollow silence as he dropped to one knee, his hand pressed to his side, red blooming beneath his fingers like a dark flower. I ran to him, the air thick with the smell of metal and smoke, the walls around us trembling as another explosion echoed outside. "Damiano!" I gasped, falling to my knees beside him. No, you're okay! You're okay!" His hand found mine, gripping it tightly, his eyes locking onto mine with that same fierce clarity that had always terrified me. "You have to go," he said, his voice strained but steady. "They'll kill you if you stay." "I'm not leaving you," I said, tears blurring my vision. "I can't." He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "You always say that," he whispered, "and you always do." A door burst open somewhere behind us, shouts in the distance, boots pounding against the floor. I could see movement through the smoke, figures closing in, armed, merciless. Damiano pushed me back, his hand slick with blood. "Run," he said, his voice breaking on the word. "Please, Bella, run." I hesitated for only a second. Then I kissed him, fast, desperate, tasting salt and smoke and sorrow, and turned, running down the hall toward the back exit. The air was thick, the smoke choking, my shoulder throbbing with every step. I could hear the gunfire continuing behind me, each shot a heartbeat, each pause a prayer. I burst through the back door into the cold night, the rain finally falling, heavy and relentless. The world outside was chaos, flames rising from the far end of the vineyard, men shouting, cars burning, the storm above merging with the one below. I stumbled through the mud, my vision spinning, every breath a struggle. Then I heard it, a sound that cut through everything. A single gunshot, louder than the rest. And then silence. I froze, my body trembling, the rain washing the blood from my hands, my mind refusing to believe what it already knew. I turned slowly, my eyes searching through the smoke for any sign of him, for any movement, any shadow. But there was nothing. Just the echo of that last shot, still ringing in the distance, and the unbearable weight of a world that had just ended. I sank to my knees in the mud, the storm swallowing my sobs, the taste of ash and rain on my tongue. Somewhere behind me, engines roared to life, voices shouted orders, but I heard none of it. Because in that moment all I could think, over and over, like a prayer I didn't know how to finish, was that love, no matter how dark, always demands a price. And I was finally beginning to understand what it meant to pay it. Then, through the chaos, through the wind and rain and grief, I heard it. Faint, broken, but real. A voice. My name. "Isabella," I turned toward the sound, heart pounding, hope flaring like lightning. And then just before the world went black, I saw him, Damiano, staggering through the smoke, blood pouring from his side, his hand reaching for me. Then another figure emerged behind him, gun raised, a flash of light, and everything disappeared. When I woke, the world was white. Not the kind of white that comes with purity or peace, but the kind that blinds you, that erases edges and color and meaning until everything is the same. Silent, sterile, empty. The first thing I heard was the sound of a monitor beeping somewhere near my head, steady, patient, a sound that tethered me to life even when I wasn't sure I wanted to stay. My body ached in ways I couldn't name, and my arm felt heavy, a thin tube trailing from it like a leash connecting me to something invisible and mechanical. I turned my head slowly, and the light hurt. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked linen. The window was open a crack, letting in the faint sound of waves crashing against distant rocks. And it was only then, when I saw the sea beyond the glass, that I remembered. The storm, the gunfire, the blood, his voice, Isabella. Panic surged through me before my body could keep up. I sat up too fast, pain flaring sharp through my shoulder, the memory of the bullet burning through my skin again. A nurse appeared, her expression startled, her voice gentle but practiced. "You need to rest," she said in Italian, and when I asked, no, begged, to know where I was, she hesitated before answering. "A clinic near Salerno," she said. "You were found unconscious near the coast. You've been here for 3 days." 3 days. My heart stopped for a beat that felt longer than a lifetime. "Where is he?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. She looked at me for a long moment, pity softening her face. "He was here," she said quietly, "but he left. We don't know where." And just like that, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to believe she was lying, that he was still somewhere nearby, pacing the halls, waiting for me to open my eyes so he could remind me that nothing, not even death, would take me from him. But the silence that followed her words was too final, too still, too much like goodbye. When she left, I pulled the IV from my arm, ignoring the sting, the small bloom of blood. I needed air, space, truth. I stumbled to the window, the world outside painted in shades of gray and salt. The sea looked endless, cruelly calm, the kind of calm that follows catastrophe. Somewhere out there, maybe beneath the waves or beyond them, lay the end of everything I had been running from. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice in my head, not the way it had sounded when he gave orders or made promises, but the way he said my name when we were alone, when it wasn't a command or a claim, but a prayer. I remembered the way his blood had stained my hands, the way his body had crumpled in the smoke, the way his eyes had found mine even as the world fell apart around us. And I remembered the last thing he said. Run. So I had. But running had never saved me. It had only delayed the inevitable. The moment when I would have to choose between the life I wanted and the one his love had built around me like a cage. The next morning, an envelope arrived. No name, no return address. Just my room number written neatly in dark ink. The nurse handed it to me with a small frown, and I waited until she left before opening it. Inside, there was only a single piece of paper, thick and cream-colored, folded once. "You once asked me what love meant to a man like me. The handwriting was his. It means everything and nothing. It means the reason I fight and the reason I fall. It means you." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I forced myself to keep reading. The Ricci's are gone. Their house, their name, their power, all of it turned to ash. The price was high, too high, but it's paid. You're safe now. I made sure of it. You'll never have to look over your shoulder again. They'll come for me instead, Maybe they already have by the time you read this. Maybe I'm writing to you from somewhere I can't leave. Either way, I need you to live, Bella. Not survive. Live. Find a place the world doesn't know and breathe without fear. That's the only thing I've ever wanted for you. There was no signature. He didn't need one. The letter slipped from my fingers, landing softly on the sheets, but its weight stayed pressed against my heart. I sank to the floor, my body trembling. My soul caught between grief and fury, and a love that refused to die no matter how much blood it cost. I hated him for leaving. I hated him for saving me. I hated him for giving me a future I didn't ask for. But most of all, I hated that I still loved him. The days that followed blurred into each other, filled with the dull rhythm of recovery, of pretending that I was whole when I was nothing but the echo of a story that had ended in smoke. I told myself that I would leave soon, that I would go somewhere far away, Paris maybe, or Buenos Aires, or anywhere his name meant nothing. But every night I found myself walking to the cliff beyond the clinic, the one that overlooked the endless sea, waiting for something I couldn't name. On the 7th night, I found it. The sea was calm, the moon high, the wind gentle. And there, resting on the stone wall at the edge of the cliff, was a black rose. Its petals glistened with dew, its stem wrapped in a thin strip of silk. Navy blue, the same color as the tie he used to wear when he wanted to look less dangerous than he was. My breath caught, and for a long time I just stood there, the wind tangling my hair, the sound of the waves below like applause from a world that had finally forgiven us. I picked up the rose, my fingers trembling, and for a moment I thought I heard him behind me. His voice, low and familiar, carried by the wind. "You see, Bella? I told you I'd always find you." I turned, but there was no one there, only the night, endless and empty and kind. I closed my eyes, the rose pressed against my chest, and let the tears fall. Not the kind that begged for pity or release, but the kind that cleanse, that turn pain into something softer, something almost like peace. I realized then that love like ours was never meant to end in forever. It was meant to burn, to destroy, to change everything it touched and leave behind only the proof that it had existed. When I finally opened my eyes again, the horizon was beginning to pale, the first hint of dawn stretching over the sea. The world looked fragile in that light, as if it too had survived something unspeakable. I placed the rose on the stone and whispered, "You kept your promise." The wind carried the words away, scattering them like ashes. Then I turned and walked back toward the path, my steps slow but steady, the horizon blooming behind me in colors that felt almost merciful. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't look back. Because some stories aren't meant to be retold. They're meant to be felt. Once, deeply, and then released into the world, where they live on in whispers and memory. And as the light touched my face, warm and new, I understood that love was never about possession, or salvation, or even forgiveness. It was about survival. About remembering that even in ruin, the heart still beats. And mine still did.